Mr. President, members of the court, it is an honor to address you this morning on the subject of the Palestinian people's right to self-determination, the extended deprivation of this inalienable right and its permanent quest to exercise it fully. 53 states and 3 international organizations submitted written statements to the court. Not a single one, not even Israel, claimed that the Palestinian people was not entitled to self-determination under international law.
Mr. President, the written statements before you offer no discordant note to the 3 core propositions that the State of Palestine advances in these proceedings. First, the Palestinians are a distinct people. Second, as such, they enjoy the very same rights as every other people, including that most foundational of rights, namely the right to self-determination, to decide for themselves how they will live and organize politically, socially, economically, in accordance with and subject to international law. As Professor Hirsch Lauterpacht put it in 1945, in the language of another age, freedom means, and I quote, the right of self-government through rulers chosen by and accountable to him. And equality demands an equal opportunity of self-government and cultural development. End of quote. Third, the Palestinian people's right to self-determination has real and practical consequences. It is not an empty slogan. That right includes, but is not limited to, the right to control their own land and natural resources, the right to be free from demographic manipulations by any third party, and the right to determine their own political status, economic development, their own futures. Mr. President, members of the court, there is no dispute as to the right of self-determination of the Palestinian people. It has never been an issue, not since the time of the Mandate. And this court made that clear 2 decades ago in its opinion in the War case, when it said loud and clear, the existence of a Palestinian people is no longer an issue. What is before this court now is the ability of the Palestinian people to exercise that right, and Israel's systematic and prolonged violation of that right. What does the right to self-determination mean in practice? How has Israel violated it? And what are the consequences of those violations? Mr. President, members of the court, in its written statement, the State of Palestine explained that the right to self-determination comprises 4 specific components. First, the right to territorial integrity. Second, the right not to be subjected to demographic manipulations within that territory by a foreign power. Third, the right to exercise permanent sovereignty over its natural resources. And fourth, the right to be able to pursue its chosen economic, social, and cultural development. The prolonged occupation, colonization, and purported annexation by Israel of Palestinian territory, with all the discriminatory and other unlawful acts, have and continue to deprive the Palestinian people of each of these 4 distinct components. Let me start with the right to territorial integrity, so recently recognized and given effect by the court in its advisory opinion on Chagos and endorsed by an overwhelming majority by the General Assembly of the United Nations. This implements Resolutions 1514 and 2625. Yet Israel has clearly violated the territorial integrity of the occupied Palestinian territories through over more than half a century of belligerent occupation. As Mr. Reichler has described, it has purportedly annexed Jerusalem and the West Bank, and it has established hundreds of settlements populated by more than 700,000 settlers regarded as a permanent part of Israel. It has extended the wall that this court found to be illegal in 2004. It has confined Palestinians to enclaves. It has severed Jerusalem. It has restricted Palestinian rights of entry from the rest of the OPT. It has transformed the Gaza Strip into an impoverished enclave, a besieged, bombarded community severed from the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Its leaders have declared that Israel will be sovereign over all the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, and it has made this formal government policy. What's the consequence of this? It is the acquisition of territory by force. It is the reduction and fragmentation, as you have seen, of the territory left for the Palestinians. And this is a manifest violation of Palestine's territorial integrity, its unity, its contiguity, which are core elements of the right to self-determination. The General Assembly, the Security Council, the Human Rights Council have repeatedly called for the preservation of Palestine's territorial integrity and condemned Israel's acts as a violation of the right of the Palestinian people to exercise their self-determination. And so we urge the court to declare Israel's 56-year occupation to be unlawful, to confirm, to take the words of your recent opinion in the Chagos case, that Israel is under an obligation to bring its presence on the territory of Palestine to an end and to do so as rapidly as possible. Mr. President, members of the court, I turn to the right not to be subjected to demographic manipulation. The Palestinian people, as you've heard and are aware, have been subject to a century of dispossession and displacement in manifest violation of their right to self-determination. This is in two ways. First, the forcible displacement undermines the integrity of the people, as the court has confirmed in the Wall and Chagos opinions. Between 1947 and 1949, during the Nakba, between 750,000 and 900,000 Palestinians were forcibly displaced. In 1967, a further 400,000 were forcibly displaced. Refugees are prevented from being able to return, and forcible displacements continue today. Entire communities in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, are now before our very eyes on a daily basis across the entirety of Gaza. Second, transferring another people into the territory of Palestine is contrary to international law. It undermines the exercise by Palestine of its right to self-determination. Yet Israel declares that hundreds of thousands of unlawful settlers will somehow remain there permanently and forever. This is a demographic manipulation of the highest order. It is grave, it continues, it violates the right of self-determination. The law requires that such actions must end forthwith. Mr. President, members of the court, the third aspect is the right to exercise permanent sovereignty over natural resources, as recognised by Article 1 of the two international covenants and by so many UN bodies. The resources include land, fresh water, agricultural and mineral resources, including hydrocarbons. Israel's control and purported annexation of the occupied Palestinian territories embraces both the land and its natural resources. For example, Israel systematically appropriates water resources. In the West Bank alone, the United Nations has documented prohibitions on Palestinians drawing waters from the River Jordan and grossly inequitable allocations of vital groundwaters as between Israelis and Palestinians. Israel pillages rock quarries. Israel prevents Palestinian exploitation of hydrocarbon deposits onshore and offshore. These too are manifest violations of the right of self-determination. Mr. President, members of the Court, the fourth component of the right to self-determination is the right of a people to determine its own political status and direction and to pursue its own economic, social and cultural development of its choice. This is confirmed by a multitude of instruments and General Assembly resolutions. Yet Israel persists in prohibiting and punishing political expressions of Palestinian identity and nationhood. Flags are outlawed and attacked. Civil society organisations and political parties are declared to be unlawful. Leaders and elected representatives and civilians more generally, including so many children, are assaulted, exiled, imprisoned or killed. General Assembly resolutions and many treaties confirm that these rights exist under international law, and they've been systematically violated. The economic, social and cultural rights of the Palestinian people are suppressed by a prolonged and unlawful occupation, by the purported annexation of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, by the settlements, by the wall and its associated regime and infrastructure, by the blockade of Gaza, by the fragmentation of land, by the deprivation of resources, by the restrictions on freedom and movement of people and of goods, and by a multitude of other acts of subjugation and collective punishment. These acts and others have curtailed the access of the Palestinian people to livelihoods. They have made the country and the people totally dependent on aid. Cultural development, too, is under sustained assault. Access to religious and cultural sites is restricted, and the centuries-long historic status quo at Jerusalem's Christian and Muslim holy sites, notably at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, is undermined and violated. Religious, social and cultural events are stopped. Schools and universities are besieged or just demolished. Cultural heritage is usurped or just destroyed. Writers, poets, academics are simply prevented from expressing themselves, and some, like the renowned poet Rafat al-Arir, have simply been killed. Religious leaders face intimidation, harassment and incitement. And so too it goes for Palestinian social development. The World Bank, the World Health Organization, has described the health system in the occupied Palestinian territories as fragmented and fragile. Access to housing is destroyed by forced expulsions, demolition orders, seizure and destruction of property, discriminatory planning, violence and intimidation from settlers. In the Gaza Strip, the economic, social and cultural life of the Palestinian people has been decimated. After 17 years of blockade, the population is destitute. It is subjected to destruction on an industrial scale, now utterly dependent on humanitarian aid merely to exist. This continuing military assault today shocks the conscience of the world. Is it consistent with the right of self-determination? Mr. President. One only has to ask the question to see how it answers itself. The violence and restrictions imposed on Palestinians impact every aspect of Palestinian life. That's UNCTAD reporting in March 2003. And of course, today, the situation is even more grave. The violation of Palestine's exercise of the right to self-determination is manifest and it is gross. In summary, Israel has arrogated to itself the right to decide who owns Palestinian land, who may live on it, and how it is to be used. On Israel's approach, it decides on the use of resources and allocations of benefits. On Israel's approach, it decides whether Palestinians remain or return. On Israel's approach, it decides how, if at all, Palestinians may meet, trade, teach, worship, live, love. And Israel wants more. Its current Prime Minister and government celebrate the denial of Palestinian exercise of self-determination, of sovereignty and statehood. They celebrate it. They claim a right to construct settlements in the Palestinian territory. And with pride, they speak of the power to frustrate the Oslo Accords and Palestinian statehood, the ultimate expression of the right of self-determination. Mr. President, let us be blunt. Israel has sought to negate the rights of the Palestinian people to exercise their right of self-determination in all aspects across all parts of the territory of mandatory Palestine. It has done so for decades, and it wishes to do so forever. Tragically, Israel celebrates the manifest violation of international law inherent in its prolonged occupation. Tragically, Israel asserts the right of national self-determination in the State of Israel, and I'm quoting, is unique to the Jewish people under its own 2018 basic law. Tragically, Israel sets its face against the role of international law. No one in this great hall of justice is starry-eyed about international law, but it is what we have. And it is your role as judges of this court, the principal judicial organ of the United Nations, to affirm the place and the power of international law, to confirm the illegality of the occupation, to make clear that Palestine, in all respects, meets the criteria of statehood under international law, with all the rights and responsibilities that implies. Mr. President, members of the Court, the existence and exercise of the right to self-determination are not conditional. The right is a peremptory right. This is recognised by states, by judges of this court, by the International Law Commission, by commentators. And what that means in practice is that there is no derogation from the existence or exercise of the right. In Chagos, the court confirmed that Resolution 1514, which recognises self-determination, must be exercised without any conditions or reservations, reflects customary general international law. The only limitation on the right, the court has said, is that the free and genuine expression of the people concerned has to be exercised in accordance with international law. In Chagos, this court swatted away British and American arguments that alleged security concerns somehow trumped the right of self-determination and its exercised. And we trust that the court will dismiss the argument that somehow the Palestinian people's right of self-determination is conditional upon a subjective determination by another state as to matters of its security. This right to self-determination includes the right of a people to form a sovereign and independent state. More than 140 states have recognized Palestine as a state, with a population, with a defined territory, with a government, being a party to multiple treaties, a state with rights and with obligations. Mr. President, members of the Court, Palestinian statehood is not dependent on the approval of Israel. An occupying power does not have and cannot have a right of veto over the right of self-determination of the Palestinian people. The inalienable rights of the Palestinian people include the right of self-determination, national independence, and sovereignty. What are the consequences of Israel's violations of Palestine's right to self-determination and its exercise? Professor Pillay is going to address these matters, so I can be brief. As the purpose and effect of the occupation is the denial of the right of self-determination and the prevention, let's be frank, of the solution called for by the Security Council, the General Assembly, and the vast majority of states of our world, premised on the existence of the two-state solution, the occupation is illegal and must be brought to an immediate, unconditional and total end. The right of self-determination requires that UN member states bring Israel's occupation to an immediate end. No aid, no assistance, no complicity, no contribution to forcible actions, no money, no arms, no trade, no nothing. All UN members are obliged by law to end Israel's presence on the territory of Palestine, period. In concluding, Mr. President, members of the Court, may I respond to the unfortunate point made by a small number of states that an opinion from this Court would somehow negatively impact future negotiations. With great respect, the truth is the very opposite. First, the Court has confirmed already the Palestinian people have a right to self-determination without derogation. The existence and exercise of the right to self-determination is not and can never be a matter for negotiation. Second, the function of this Court, of these judges, of you, is to state the law, to spell out the legal rights and obligations that will allow a just solution in the future in conformity with international law. The political context is totally irrelevant. The legal questions in Namibia, in the Wall case, in the Chagos case, all had a political context. But the Court did not blink. It has never shied away from drawing the consequences of the right to self-determination. In Chagos and in Namibia, the advisory opinions have been significant and positive in their outcomes and effects. By identifying the applicable legal principles and then applying them to the facts, the Court performs a most significant, uniquely significant role for protagonists and for the international community as a whole. With great respect to my friends from the United States and Britain, it is the very opposite of what they have written. The function of this Court in interpreting and applying the right of self-determination of the Palestinian people can only assist in a solution based on the law, by setting out the parameters required by the law to resolve the matter. A forthright advisory opinion from this Court makes a resolution more likely, not less likely. Mr. President, in 1945, Professor Hirsch Lauterpacht wrote that self-determination is an enlightened and beneficent ideal to which the formation of states must conform if both justice and the peace of the world are to be secured. That is the beating heart of self-determination. The idea that a people must be able to determine for themselves their lives and their futures. And Hirsch Lauterpacht personally knew of what he spoke. And we know that he was right. Israel's actions, as you have heard already today and will hear in the coming days, are manifest, grave and continuing violations of the right of which Lauterpacht spoke. And we invite this court to so declare, to help bring to an end this affront, to allow the Palestinian people to determine the conditions under which they will live in their territory, under their government, under the law, and to do so fully and to do so forthwith. That's what international law requires, no more and no less. Mr. President, I thank you for your kind attention, and I invite you to call Professor Pillay